You're listening to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast, a place for sex addicts to share their experiences of recovery, to help break the stigma, myths, and misconceptions of sex addiction. This podcast may contain topics of sexuality, sexual trauma, dysfunction, or other things that may be triggering, so listener discretion is advised. Hello, and welcome to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. My name is Jason, I'm a sex addict, and I will be your podcast host for today. How's it going, everyone? Welcome to episode number 67 of the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. This week, I am happy to be sharing part 2 of the SAA and COSA speaker meeting that happened a few months ago. This week, we'll be featuring the speaker Theresa D from Southern California, and she will be sharing on behalf of COSA. And for anyone that is new listening to the podcast, I thought I'd share a little bit about what COSA is. We've done a number of these recordings from our SAA and COSA speaker meetings, and this comes from the COSA website, which is COSA-recovery.org. What is COSA? COSA is a 12-step recovery program for those whose lives have been affected by compulsive sexual behavior. Adapted from Alcoholics Anonymous and Al-Anon, COSA is a program for our spiritual development, no matter what our religious beliefs. As we meet to share our experience, strength, and hope while working the 12 steps, we grow stronger in spirit. We begin to lead our lives more serenely and in deeper fulfillment, little by little, one day at a time. Only in this way can we be of help to others. Listening to Teresa speak, she talked a lot about codependency, and I was looking for a reading in one of the books around codependency, and what I did find was readings around boundaries. And this one comes from the SAA book, Voices of Recovery, on January 24th. And for anyone that has the book, it is on page 24. We look at how we have neglected our physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual needs. We examine the ways in which we allowed others to abuse us and treat us poorly. Sex Addicts Anonymous, page 36. Forgiveness means letting go of the hope or expectation that I can change the past. Today, I can accept that, and that's all I'm invited to agree to by saying the word forgive. This brings a huge sense of peace. In the past, I felt forced to forgive as being part of a good person, but it often meant allowing other people to own my power. It allowed me to be bullied and victimized, and it created the false belief that that's what I deserved and what life had to offer me. Forgiveness does not mean that I'm going to fix or change the person, their behavior, or the relationship. Also, forgiveness does not mean giving up my boundaries or being exposed and vulnerable to people who don't deserve my trust. Now, forgiveness means loving myself enough to let go of the past and its grip on me, choosing to focus on today and all the wonderful things it has to offer me, including the steps and all the tools and gifts of recovery. Forgiveness means honoring and caring for my greatest gift and responsibility, my life. Today, I have a choice. God, I thank you for recovery, for forgiveness, and for my ability to be open to a wonderful present. So yeah, like I said, I was looking for a reading around codependency and readings around having boundary issues. And this is one that I found that I felt that really connected with what Teresa had to share. And so this week I'm keeping the intro and outro really brief because we have been in a bit of a heat wave, and the room that I usually record in has the air conditioning, and I haven't had a lot of privacy, but I do have a small window of opportunity to record here. So I'm doing the intro and outro and have this posted. So back to the SAA and COSA speaker meeting that happened a few months ago. We had Christine C. on last week's episode 66 from Indiana, share her story from SAA, and this week sharing Theresa D's story from COSA. I'm now ready to turn it over to Teresa. So here it is, and I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you, Martha Jean. My name is Teresa. I am a grateful recovering COSA, and I'm from Southern California, and my life has been affected by compulsive sexual behavior. Thank you, Christine, for your lead. It was awesome. I almost feel like I'm not ready to follow that. It was so powerful, but thank you. It was really an awesome share. And thanks to Cindy P. for inviting me to speak tonight. I'm just going to tell you all, I'm extremely nervous, and I'm going to be reading it. So I'm going to try to maintain some composure because I get a little emotional. So a little bit about me. I grew up in a very dysfunctional 12-step home. My father was in recovery for alcoholism and drug addiction. And my mother spent the first 7 years of my life, actually, probably the last 5, or, from the years 2 to 7, trying to get into recovery. So, it was kind of an interesting growing up. I'm the eldest of 3 girls. My childhood revolved around the 12 steps. I mean, I went to meetings. I was surrounded by recovering addicts and alcoholics sleeping on our sofa because my dad was willing to be of service. The one thing I learned very quickly was how to be the perfect codependent. My father groomed me well. I learned at the age of 7 how to take care of everyone's needs, and that was my job. I learned that my value depended on what I could do for everyone else. My childhood was very tumultuous. When I was 7 years old, my father left my mother, and he left us with a woman who was not in recovery, a woman who was not sober, an alcoholic and a drug addict. And she tried to commit suicide. And in trying to commit suicide, she sat 3 of her 3 daughters in front of an open oven with the gas on. And the crazy thing is that I think that looking back at this, I realized that, God had a different plan, had stepped in. And the neighbor down the street came and knocked on our door. And my mother turned off the gas and answered the door. And the woman said, "I didn't see the girls go to school today. Are they okay?" And she said, "Yeah, they weren't feeling well. Everything is okay." And she packed us up. After the woman left, she packed us up and dropped us off at where my dad was living. And my dad worked a swing shift. So there we sat on a porch, my sisters, 7, 5, and 3. And we sat on a porch waiting for my dad to come home at midnight. So it was very, like I said, tumultuous. And from that point on, I always felt like, I had to prove my worthiness, taking care of everybody. I can remember from the age of 15 to 18, I became very sexually active. I was date raped 3 times. 2 resulted in abortions. I never told my parents. I did it all on my own. The self-loathing that I felt and the validation of not being good enough as a result of the violence I'd experienced was all consuming and left me feeling so alone and isolated. No one in my family knew this. Not my sisters, nobody. I never even told my friends, nobody, because there was so much shame. I had met my husband, my SAH, my qualifier, at 18. Interestingly enough, we worked at the same place. And I can say that I was probably the aggressor In fact, I know I was the aggressor in the relationship. But yeah, by the age of 19, I was pregnant. And I truly wasn't interested in getting married. When I told my parents, I remember my father saying that he said, "Don't worry, you don't need to get married. I'll help you raise your child." And I remember telling my husband, or my SAH at the time, that if he wanted to walk away, he could, because my father was going to help me. At 6 months pregnant, we decided to move in together, but with the idea that I wasn't interested in getting married at the time. And I didn't want it to be getting married because there was a kid. And the other thing was, I always told myself, after, living this life with in and around the 12 steps, and meetings and conventions and all of this, I thought, no way. I'm never going to marry a drug addict or an alcoholic, a recovering drug addict or an alcoholic on top of it all. Because I had grown up in that environment and I just saw so much pain, despair, hopelessness. And yes, there were victories for some, but for others, there wasn't. And, it was not something I wanted to have in my life. And that decision for me in moving in we decided to move in. And then after our son was born, we got married. And what I realized was that decision for me was the fear of remaining under the control of my father. And it was, I saw it as an escape from that insanity of my family of origin, or so I thought. But through the years, I had a very contentious relationship with my family throughout my marriage. I spent years in and out of the fold of their love, which was always conditional, depending on my willingness to follow their rules and expectations and to be of service to them. After 8 years of marriage, 2 children, purchasing a new home computer, I discovered my husband was addicted to porn and was compulsively masturbating. I'd found movies that he'd rented. I mean, it was like shock to me. And I felt so isolated and alone at that discovery because I couldn't tell anybody, the shame that that's who I married and, who is the father of my children. So, yeah, I mean, there was just that absolute shame and complete sense of worthlessness. Everything that I had felt when I was younger, in the sense of, of my codependency, that I felt now was being validated by my husband's behavior. So the interesting thing is that, I searched the internet for some type of program for him. I found the SAA website. I answered all the questions for him. And, and in my mind, I was deciding, yep, he was the sex addict. And that's where he belonged. My whole thinking was, I was going to fix him. I was going to rescue him from his addiction, and I was going to provide the information and help him along the way. I remember I gave him the website, and he started going to meetings, and we had both sought therapy individually and as a couple. And at the time, I didn't think that, it was necessary for me to participate in a 12-step program because I didn't have the problem. I wasn't a sex addict. And the reality of my growing up was that I grew up in that environment and, I didn't need it. And he was the one that had the problem, not me. The next 8 years were filled with a lot of denial, fear, anger, shame, isolation, and worthlessness. And at this time, this is when my life really changed. 8 years after that first discovery, my father died. And it was a very hard time for me, because being the eldest daughter and the perfect codependent, it was my job to take care of everything, to get everything, situated for the services, for, getting things done, and not really any time to grieve. So when my father died, my husband relapsed. He probably relapsed before that, but that was probably my first indication. That's when I realized he had relapsed, and his acting out behaviors escalated. At that point, I was feeling very hopeless and helpless, and that's when I went searching the internet for help, and that was help for me this time. It was April 2002. That's when I walked in the doors of COSA. And I attended my first face-to-face meeting. I was scared to death. I pulled into the parking lot of the church and I sat there. I sat there for 15 minutes. I didn't go in right when the meeting started because I was hoping to avoid talking to anybody. It was like I didn't want to talk to anybody. I was just going to go and see what this was all about. I was feeling tremendous resentment towards my husband and his addiction for putting me in this place. And as I sat in this meeting, I knew no one could have a story worse than mine. Of course, I think we all individually believe our story is the worst. And I was completely wrong. I went to meetings regularly, twice a week, or 3 times a week. I hung around for 4 years. And I kind of worked the steps on my own, but not having any real understanding or direction on how to work them. And there weren't that many people there that were willing to sponsor. So it was kind of difficult. You had to kind of just, and for those in COSA know, we have the booklets, and that's what I did. I worked the pamphlets. I was still feeling so alone and hopeless, a lot of shame and fear of the next relapse. I went through the motions of trying to work the steps, but looking back, I was really just willing to look at the surface crap because, my understanding was the past was the past, and it was just that. It was history, and that there wasn't any connection to my past to what I was dealing with in my marriage. So I stopped going to meetings. In 2009, my SAA was, he was going to meetings, had a sponsor, and was sponsoring others, going to therapy, in a men's group with his therapist and other fellow sex addicts. And, all along, I wanted to believe that my husband was working a program, but all the while he had been actively acting out for 7 years. He was lying to me and everyone. I was dying inside. All those fears of abandonment, isolation, worthlessness, shame, and anger all came charging right back in. And once again, my denial reared its ugly head, and I chose to look the other way. For the next 7 years, there were 3 more relapses, and I hadn't been to a COSA meeting, and I wasn't willing to go either. I was feeling suicidal and homicidal. I contemplated taking my own life. It was just so life was just so painful, and I just wanted it all to stop. And I can remember taking a bottle of wine, and I had some painkillers, and I was just going to drink that, go to a hotel, and they would find me and it'd be done. But I worried about how this would or could be explained to my sons. What were they going to think of me? How was that going to be explained? And then the homicidal was was very clear. I can remember he was sleeping, and he'd come home. He was sleeping from a night shift. He worked at night, and I remember getting up for work really early, and we had a gun. And I remember I held it to his head. It was loaded and ready, and I was going to hold it to his head. I held it to his head, and I thought I'd just end this pain, the heartbreak, all of this, and be done and over with, and I don't have to put up with this crap anymore. Again came the thought of how do I explain this to my sons while I'm in jail, right? Because not only will they lose their father, they'll lose their mother too. I just went to work and just feeling extremely hopeless. 2017, the Monday after Mother's Day, my husband announced another relapse. And this time he told me only because he thought he had an STD and he had given it to me. I was devastated. The hopelessness was just so unbearable, shattered, angry, fearful, and so isolated. And the shame and worthlessness that I felt was so overwhelming. He claimed he'd only been acting out for 8 months, but for those 7 years, I thought he was sober. 4 of them he'd been acting out. And this was the most difficult because in the 3 years prior, that he had been acting out, I had a serious illness and I was really sick. It was very debilitating. I was, lost the ability to walk. I lost all my hair. I lost 50 pounds. I was a shell of myself. And at the time, I can remember thinking, that he was there, he was present. And for what it's worth, those times that he was there and present, okay, it was at that moment in time. But what was happening outside of that was, much different. And almost a year to the date of becoming sick, we both were in a head-on collision. And we both spent 5 days in the hospital. Pretty devastating. I was at this point that, I had to really set some serious boundaries and really evaluate whether I wanted to continue into this relationship. I think it was a week later after this, not sure how much longer, but it was a little bit later that I became aware that he was involved in an emotional relationship. That's when I went to my first COSA Zoom meeting. I was mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually shattered. I went to every meeting I could. I think I went to, I think at the time that I came in, it was 2017. There were maybe 5 meetings. And I went to every single one of them. I shared my pain. And the one thing I did was I listened. I came to the realization that I needed to start taking control of my life. Stop being a victim. As I gained strength with every meeting I attended, being honest about working the program, I got a sponsor and started working the steps. And it's been quite the process and an amazing journey with the love and encouragement from my sponsor and my renewed relationship with my higher power, which is something that I never had. I thought I did, but I didn't really. I found the strength to move forward, not just for my marriage or for my husband, but for me. I had to learn to take care of my own brokenness. I found I was able to make my load a little bit lighter as I journeyed through the steps with the belief that I'm not alone. Realized that I had to change my whole idea of who I am. What do I want? What do I realize? Realize that I'm not in control, that nothing is going to change unless I surrendered and handed over my will to my higher power. I still want to be in control, but I'm reminded that it doesn't work that way, and it never does. I had to learn to trust God, something that I never believed in, believing that I was not worthy of God's love because of who I was, what I've done in the past, and that I wasn't a believer. And God only takes care of those that believe. You know, there were a few more relapses. And in August of 2020, COVID, I took a trip to Colorado. And this was an amazing trip. And it was cleansing and inspiring. And I did this as a result of a relapse. I did things during that trip that allowed me to see that no matter what, I was going to be okay. That whether we were together or not, that I was strong, I was a strong woman and I could make healthy decisions for myself. I realized that I was worthy of self-respect, self-love, and most of all, trust in a higher power. This program has, for the past 6 years, been working in me, through me, and for me. There were moments of ignorance, but the pain of this relapse is real, and the anger and rage I felt was so overwhelming. I was drowning in the insanity of his addiction and making my codependency and my SAH my higher power, instead of actually trusting a power greater than myself. I can now face the fact that for years I have struggled with denial. I chose to ignore those little nudges from my higher power that something didn't feel right or off. I would acknowledge them in my meetings. I would share that something didn't feel right, but I didn't have anything tangible to think. He was acting out, and he was doing a damn good job of acting as if, lying and gaslighting. I had to let it go. Not my job to control that. Reminding myself that he needs to work his own program and it's not my job to be his monitor. And see, I lost myself. Once again, you know, I made my denial my higher power, and it allowed me to quiet that inner voice and those gut feelings that something wasn't right. Today, I've had to reevaluate my life with a sex addict. I'm making no decisions on the state of being together or not being together. It is what it is, and it's one day at a time. Boundaries have changed and are a bit more clear, but reflect what I need to do to feel safe in this relationship, and also boundaries that allow me to trust myself. I no longer ignore those twinges of doubt. I ask questions when I do not feel safe, and remind myself that when I do ask questions, that I do it from a place of peace and calm, and most of all, love for myself and my husband, not accusatory or reactionary. If not for the tools of this program, the steps, the meetings, the fellowship, the surrender and trust that my higher power is doing for me what I can't do for myself, this was a hard lesson to learn, and believe that as I let go little by little, I begin to see, feel, and hear the changes in my life. Working the steps this time around has opened up so much of my past. As painful as it is to remember and relive mentally, emotionally, and physically my life, I have found that there's growth and understanding. In my past attempts in working the steps, my answers were usually 3 or 4 lines. That was as honest as I was willing to be. It was so painful, yet I had this feeling like if I wrote more, I would sound like I'm whining and complaining. I'm now able to actually delve into the deeper, more painful memories, process these memories, and then let them go with love. And as my therapist has reminded me over and over again, that for so long I played this story, my story, over and over, and it became my reality of what I thought was my past. But as I continue to write and work the steps, the story has changed because of the new realizations. The painful crap I tried so hard to forget and even deny or excuse, I can now look at it, feel it, process it, and let it go. Just as they arrived in my life from the people who were there to love and protect me, I have to be willing to let them go in the same way with love. They no longer define me. They don't go away. Today I can forgive, but I may not forget. I know that today they just don't take up space in my head and heart anymore to cause that deep, suffocating pain. Strangely, I can rejoice in letting them go with love. I feel lighter and have this new sense of gratitude for all these experiences. I have a wonderful sponsor, participate in a step study group, stay connected to my COSA family, learning from each and every one of you. I know that I'm not alone on this journey. This process of surrender and trust is very new to me. Scary at times, but so freeing. And my life today is so much more meaningful and full of so many gifts from this program. For the past 2 years, I have a practice of centering prayer and meditation. And I'm so grateful to say that I share this with my husband. And this for me, and I think for us in our relationship, has been the difference, not just in our attitude, but our willingness to trust our own higher powers. I'm still with my partner, 40 years, and today with both of us honestly working our programs, we are learning how to communicate, share how we feel, say what we mean what we say, and not say it meanly. I'm growing stronger every day with the belief, trust, and love for my higher power. I have better understanding of my codependency, how it has affected my entire life, and realize that today I choose to live a life full of self-love. I can put myself first and not feel guilty. I have found my voice, a voice that was shuttered at 7 years old. I own my part in this insanity I call my life. I am slowly but surely realizing as I work this amazing program, I'm now starting to peel away those layers of shame, blame, and fear to find this amazing woman who has this story, but I no longer have to use it to define me. I now get to write her new story. I am a survivor, no longer a victim. Thank you for letting me share today.
Many, many thanks to Teresa for sharing her story and being so emotionally open. And yeah, I really connected with a lot of that from the SAA perspective, being that person who has had multiple relapses in the program and seeing it from my perspective in my own recovery, but not being able to see it through the eyes of my wife. And so having Teresa talking about the pain that was involved in her side of it really gave me new compassion towards my wife and her journey. And like I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, I'm going to keep the intro and outro really brief. I did want to touch on some of the comments that we've been getting on the YouTube channel. And just thinking of the YouTube channel, I've been recently editing certain episodes that have been blocked due to copyright claims. This is happening a lot with a lot of YouTubers, and so not just in the podcast realm, but in a lot of reaction videos. And I've talked about reaction videos that I watch, and a lot of their content is being blocked either immediately or months after the fact. And so several of these episodes have been posted and up for a while, and then have subsequently been blocked due to usage of a song. And again, there is the fair use of copyright material law that I could fight with YouTube, but instead of waiting months for results on that, what I've decided to do is edit certain episodes so it pulls the material in question out of the recording, so you'll hear a moment of pause. And I'm trying to do that to make every episode available, and as they're popping up, I'm re-editing those. So in case you happen to be missing an episode here or there, that's why it's gotten pulled down, and I am doing my best to keep up with that and do some editing around it so it can still be viewed. Most of the times I have the links to the songs that were used in that episode. And again, I use a lot of music in these episodes because of my journey of music and recovery. It really helps me in my program, and my higher power connects to me through music. So that being said, I did want to read a couple of the comments that have come in recently. This one is from a few weeks ago on episode number 64 with Juan K. Even there's not a lot of likes. I was looking for this. Thanks, man. Let's keep it up. There are a lot of people out there looking for this. Yeah, thank you so much for that. And yeah, I will keep posting these episodes as long as we still have stories to share. And this one was from a few days ago on episode 25, Feeling Overwhelmed. Really special to be able to listen to this when I can't get to a meeting and really need one. Thanks, Jason. You're very, very welcome. And I think that catches us up with all the comments that we've gotten on YouTube. Again, I haven't received a lot of new feedback emails or new reviews on Apple Podcasts or iTunes. So whenever I get some new reviews in there, I will read those out. And again, rating and reviewing the podcast really helps, both on YouTube and in other podcasting platforms. So I'm grateful for everyone that has helped out in that way. So if you did want to provide feedback for the podcast, you can reach us at feedback@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com. And if you want to reach me personally, you can reach me at jason@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com if you have any questions about the podcast or if you want to be a guest on a future episode. Thinking of future episodes, probably next week I'll be sharing another recording from Joe and Charlie on step 4. And next week I will also be recording a first step at the noon meetings, and we'll be sharing that in a couple of weeks. So I'm really, really grateful for that. I was hoping to share a little bit of music at the end of this episode, but again, like I mentioned, with the air conditioning and everything, it is still super hot as I'm recording this late at night, and have to turn the air conditioning back on, which makes a lot of noise. And I'm grateful to have these few minutes to myself to do the recording while the rest of the family is not in the room. Anyway, that's all I have for this week. Again, I'm really thankful to the SAA and COSA Speaker Meeting Committee that gets these recordings together, and for everyone that showed up at that meeting, and especially to our speakers, Christine C. and Theresa D. Oh, while I'm thinking about it, there is going to be some future information on retreats. There is an online retreat that is happening in October that I've been part of a planning committee for, and this is a retreat on Zoom, and I will be sharing the info for that probably next week. If I will be talking to the committee to make sure it's okay to talk about it here on the podcast. And for the Bay Area annual retreat, we're actually doing an in-person retreat in March of 2023. And for local people here in the Bay Area, we're looking for people to be on the committee. And so if you're interested, please shoot me an email. And that's all I have for this week. I'm really grateful for you tuning into this one. And as always, keep coming back. The views and opinions contained in the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Bay Area Intergroup or the ISO of SAA.